In the last program, I was telling you about Suburban Tandem, which was the backbone of the New York City network through the early 1970s. It's a switching machine that is very old. It goes back to the 1930s, although there are some indications that it started as a manual tandem. Operators that don't have any customers on their boards, but just connect between other operator boards. I've seen literature talking about Suburban Tandem having trunks all the way to Stamford, Connecticut. As of the 1970s, it is definitely a panel sender tandem, not a manual tandem, and its trunks only go as far as places like Tarrytown and Huntington. And most of those long trunks are that kind that sounds kind of unpleasant before they answer. It seems that design flaw that had the 2 kilohertz tone leaking in did get corrected sometime in the 1960s because there are newer trunks that don't do it. But Suburban didn't have a lot of new trunks. However, I've been looking through the tapes and I found an example where Suburban actually has one of those newer trunks. Works the same way, it just doesn't have the 2000 hertz leaking through. And the reason it's a new trunk is because it goes to a new central office called Idlewild, which was installed in what is now called Kennedy Airport, especially for the purpose of providing a kind of Crossbar 5 Centrex, Centrex CO, to some of the airlines. The building is relatively new, and so is the trunk equipment. And all of the RP over N carrier trunks into that building that I've heard actually sound good. Here's a call to the ESS in that building, called from the Manhattan Avenue Crossbar 1, that's West 108th Street, Manhattan, via Suburban Tandem. We're on hook, and it sounds great. In a minute, I'm going to blow 2600. Watch what happens.
I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. The recording. They're calling from the outside. Dial 632-2121. This is a recording. You have reached a non-working line at Pan American. If you are calling from the inside, check your directory. If you are calling from the outside, dial 632-2121. This is a recording.
There's your 2 kilohertz beeps in action.
They're calling from the outside. Dial 632-2121.
When you blow 2600 on some of these trunks, it ends up ringing a semi-random number, which is what happened this time. Other times, you can actually control it. But that ends up being random too, because nobody except possibly Joe Ingressia with a lot of training can count beeps that fast. Anyway, I wanted to show you the actual 2 kilohertz tone pulsing in the way it really pulses during one of those calls, and the fact that some of those trunks sound great. So let's get back to the Bronx and how it is that Suburban Tandem is able to get through to places that can't be reached without using MF. In the outer boroughs, as well as Nassau County, Long Island, there's a different layer of the network that takes care of the direct inward dialing to the Centrex CU. That layer is called the sector tandems, and for these tandems, Centrex
The number you have reached is not in service. If you are calling from within the college, please dial.
If you are in the company,
is a secondary function. They primarily have other things to do. These tandems all receive MF. I'm going to mention the office codes handled by each one. There's no need to remember the office codes, but probably the tandems are worth noting. For example, in the Bronx,
21226.
that's a double crossbar tandem called Tremont, which handles codes 430 and 920. It's in this building. Meanwhile, in Staten Island,
Sorry, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is the recording. 212 39.
That's Staten Island Tandem, a single tandem that has 390. Yes, that's real. In downtown Brooklyn, you have 780, served by King's Tandem.
31232.
Also a double tandem unit there. And then in the Brooklyn-Queens border area, you have 240, 270, and 630, served by Bushwick.
21231.
Bushwick is a double tandem unit, and tandem number 1 does have some incoming PCI capability. That theoretically could be used by Suburban, but they never did it, probably having to do with limited capacity to receive PCI, which they didn't want to expand in the middle and late 60s when those DID codes came in. So they treat Bushwick like any other sector tandem that needs MF, which mostly it does need. In Queens, Gesundheit. No, that's actually 21235 Queens Tandem, a double unit which handled 830, 990, and later 470. And then there's a long list of office codes, starting with 222, that are handled out of Hempstead Tandems 1 and 2, a double unit, but each one has a distinct recording.
5167. 5166.
And there are a few more special cases that go through this same way. So let's call 270 one of the Bushwick DID codes. After we dial the last digit, our Cypress 4 Crossbar 1 will PCI the number to Suburban Tandem as usual. We'll then cut through to hear the tail end of Suburban setting up its switches to get a trunk to a special tandem called Pulse Conversion Tandem. Yes, that's the name, Pulse Conversion Tandem. It is a subset of New York's first Crossbar tandem called Interzone, but it has to have a separate trunk group because these trunks only receive PCI. Regular Interzone trunks are used by panels and are revertive pulse operated, so it has a different name. Suburban PCIs to Pulse Conversion Tandem and cuts through, and then Pulse Conversion Tandem MFs to Bushwick Tandem.
21231.
Bushwick then dials the last 4 digits into the Centrex, which on these trunks we don't hear.
This is a recording. You have reached a non-working number in the East New York Savings Bank. Please consult your directory or call 270-6223. 270-6223. Thank you. This is a recording. You have reached a non-working number in the East New York Savings Bank. Please consult your directory or call.
With Pulse Conversion Tandem, you can hear the MFs, but just barely. And in fact, on that last example, that's about as loud as they ever get. Here's a coin zone call to one of the Centrex CUs in Long Island's 516 area. That has to go to Hempstead Tandem 1 or 2.
5167. 5166.
So Suburban Tandem again PCIs the number to Pulse Conversion Tandem. Pulse Conversion Tandem has 2600 controlled N-carrier trunks to Hempstead, and then Hempstead, silently in this case, dial pulses the last 4 digits into the destination Centrex.
Additional, please.
operator. Thank you. Your call cannot be completed as dialed. For information when calling from outside Grumman, dial LR50574. When calling from Grumman extensions, dial 3369 or 0 for operator. Thank you. Your call cannot be completed as dialed.
You know, it's hard to say what the dumbest idea in that recording is. LR5? How about having the main number be 5750574? And then the question is, which would you rather dial, 3369 or 0? Hey, it's a military contractor, what can I say? So next I'm going to show you the routing to 780, which is a little bit strange because it starts out the same way, Suburban going to pulse conversion tandem, but then pulse conversion tandem doesn't send it to Kings,
21232.
where 780 resides. It sends it somewhere else. We think Bushwick.
21231.
This call actually goes through 4 tandems when it really ought to go through 3. Here's a call to the Brooklyn College Centrex via Suburban, pulse conversion tandem, probably Bushwick tandem, and Kings tandem.
This is a recording. You reached the non-working number of Brooklyn College. If you are calling from the outside, you can reach our attendant by dialing 780-5485 for assistance. If you are inside the college, consult your directory or dial operator for assistance. Thank you. This is a recording. You have reached the non-working number of Brooklyn College. If you are calling from the outside, you can reach our attendant by dialing 780-5485 for assistance. If you are inside the college, consult your directory or dial operator for assistance. Thank you. This is a recording. You have reached the...
Before we leave pulse conversion tandem, I should mention that it has one other user. Now, the 2nd Avenue building, where Suburban is located, has a lot of really old equipment. First of all, there's the panel, Algonquin 4, and Gramercy 3, 5, and 7. That likely included up to 3 office selector tandems that were used by Crossbar 1s in the city up until the early 1970s. Then there's Suburban Tandem itself, which has 2 divisions, A and B. I'll explain that at some later time. There's a lot of number 1 crossbar, 7 office codes, the most recent of which is 260.
Well, what I will do is I will be arriving at a private number in New York, which I shall give to you when I get there.
Very good. Very good.
It's on 260.
260?
260.
260 is a funny exchange bill. It's brand new.
What kind of office? What is it?
I think it's 1 crossbar.
Bill didn't used to appreciate number 1 crossbar, but he came around. Anyway, there are crossbar tandems, City and Interzone, both of which are used exclusively by panels, except for Interzone's pulse conversion aspect. And then there's a double crossbar tandem, Gotham,
This is a recording. 21213.
known as Gotham 8 and 9. The reason it's Gotham number 8 and number 9 is that there were 7 other machines in the building that were counting as tandems. City and Interzone each counted as 1. Suburban may have counted as 2 because it has those 2 divisions, A and B. And then there might have been 3 office selector tandems, or maybe some of the old operator boards counted. That's how old this building is. Anyway, Gotham tandem goes back to 1948, which is pretty old for a crossbar tandem. It can receive MF, but it cannot MF out. We definitely know that in the 1970s, Gotham was used for incoming short long distance from New Jersey. For that, it had to connect to the entire city, and once again, there were certain office codes that require MF, and Gotham can't MF. By the 70s, its primary function was a sector tandem covering downtown Manhattan and, from some places, Staten Island. For downtown Manhattan, Gotham had full groups to everything. But here's a call to the 333 office code, which is a number 5 crossbar Centrex. This is where number 5 crossbar acts like a private branch exchange, but really isn't. And so you have a simulated private telephone system, a service called Centrex CO. Centrex CO includes the transfer feature, where an incoming call can be redirected to the company operator. This transfer feature requires very complicated incoming trunk circuits. Those incoming trunk circuits are so expensive that it didn't make sense for Gotham to have trunks to 333. In situations like this, Gotham would usually revert a pulse to Amsterdam Tandem 1.
Recording 21219.
Which is quite a thing to behold, but I won't be covering that in this recording. In this case, for some reason, Gotham has to use the sector tandem for 333, which is Midtown Tandem.
Recording 21221.
Which can only receive MF. And so there has to be a way for Gotham to get there, and there is. Pulse Conversion Tandem. Here's the way a call to 333 sounded as dialed from a New Jersey number 5 crossbar that uses Gotham to reach New York City. The number we're calling is a special test line that at some point in the test process is actually testing the Centrex transfer feature. This call goes from the crossbar 5 we're dialing from over a 2600 controlled N-carrier trunk to Gotham Tandem, which then PCIs to Pulse Conversion Tandem. Pulse Conversion Tandem MFs to Midtown Tandem, which MFs to 333. Centrex CO, provided by number 5 Crossbar, was there from the very beginning of the Centrex concept. They really wanted to do it, and it took a lot of complexity to be able to handle more than one Centrex customer within the same Crossbar 5 unit. Also, every incoming Centrex trunk required extra relays to make transfer possible. In retrospect, I'm surprised that they did it, but they really wanted to from the start. When number 1 ESS came along, that made their life a lot easier because it was more naturally suited to Centrex CO. Now let's get back to Centrex CU, the one that has real rather than simulated private telephone systems for the companies. Of the 5 Manhattan Centrex tandems, Vesey Tandem 2 in the West Street building
2127.
is definitely the oldest, installed in 1950. But if you take a look at the office codes, all of them are from the middle 1960s. 460, 530, 552, 553, 558, and 770. There's also 640 in a different category, but 100% of those codes have no exchange names. Codes beginning with 55 were generally not assigned until the middle 1960s. Because the only exchange names that could be represented by 55 were names beginning with KL. So an exchange name like Klondike 2 is certainly reasonable, but is it KL or CL? Vesey's 55 codes do have nonsense letters LL, so it's LL2, 3, and 8. Hypothetically, that could be the name Lloyd with a double L, but Bell System literature has never mentioned that. They do mention Klondike as an example, so probably those LLs are nonsense letters. That's a 1960s thing. LT1, XX4, it was a way of transitioning from exchange names to all number calling. Meanwhile, the codes ending in 0 were generally not assigned until the middle 1960s because phone numbers like Lexington 0 or Spring 0 were kind of awkward. Los Angeles went ahead and used those, but most places didn't. With all the Centrex CU exchange codes going back only to the 60s, it's not clear what Vesey Tandem 2 was doing in 1950. As of the 1970s, it receives PCI, which it probably did from the beginning. It also receives MF. Of the 5 Centrex tandems, it has the highest percentage of incoming PCI trunks, 53%. It's also the only Centrex tandem that can outpulse MF, but it mostly dial pulses out to the various Centrex CUs. From the 294 Crossbar 1, a group of direct PCI trunks to Vesey Tandem 2 is the first choice. Here are some calls to Vesey Tandem 2 going through the first choice route. After we dial the last digit, our 294 Crossbar 1 PCIs the number to Vesey 2 and cuts through. We then hear Vesey 2 dial pulsing to the destination Centrex. New York Telephone would very often use the oldest type of rural ring machine in their Centrex CUs. This was done especially in Manhattan. Sometimes the original old rural busy signal would be used as well. Here's a call to a Centrex through Vesey Tandem 2 that gets the old busy signal. Far more common in New York, however, were Centrexes that had the original rural ring but used the slightly newer rural busy signal. Around 1975, the Bell system began retrofitting some of its old ringing machines using replacement parts from a company called Lorraine. Here's a 1978 recording where a Centrex that used to have this old rural busy signal now has the Lorraine retrofitted version. On this call, you can hear the sound of so many people hanging up that it shows that despite the Lorraine retrofit, the talkability of the old rural busy signal has not been affected by the change. Now, most of the equipment at customers' premises that provides the Centrex CU service is actually Stroger, step-by-step equipment. This equipment type doesn't work in the main part of the New York City network because interoffice trunks between a step and a panel or a number 1 crossbar were never designed by the Bell system. In the rare cases where you did have steps communicating with panels, they really had to jury-rig it. But for Centrex CU, where the only access to the network is through the 9 lines going out and the dial pulse trunks coming in, step-by-step equipment works fine, and most of the Centrex CU is. But here's a Centrex that's served by a number 101 ESS, the Bell system's first successful electronic switch, used for Centrex. It's kind of like Centrex CU, except that part of the equipment for it is in the central office and another part is at the customer's premises. In Long Island, the number 101 ESSs are connected to Crossbar 5 offices in a very advanced way that makes the call go through almost instantaneously with no dial pulsing. Here's a same office example dialed from the Farmingdale, Long Island Crossbar 5 to a 420 number.
Hello.
But in New York City, the ESS 101s hang off the Crossbar tandems, which dial pulse to them, the only difference being that if you listen really carefully, you can tell the ESS 101 is doing a flash handshake before the dial pulsing begins. Here's a VZ2 call that ends up on a number 101 ESS.
This is Reynolds Securities Incorporated. The number you have reached is not working at this time. For further information, please call 558-6000.
As we heard at the end of the last program, calls to VZ Tandem 2 sometimes alternate route through Suburban Tandem. Here's a working number in that same number 101 ESS going through Suburban. VZ Tandem 2, in addition to having recordings with the ID 2127, had a busy signal that it would sometimes connect us to. I think the intended purpose of the busy signal was for instances when all the trunks to the Centrex were busy. But in practice, it would sometimes give the busy signal when a call failed, and then there were certain number groups that would permanently go to that busy signal. Here's one of them via the direct route. I specifically remember where I was when I recorded that call. It was in early 1978, and I was standing in a real phone booth adjacent to a White Castle restaurant. I didn't mean to do this consciously, but it seems like in this recording session, Vesey Tandem has become Busy Tandem. And now I need to talk about a mystery. Vesey Tandem 2 had the ability to MF in the early 70s. But during the early 70s, there was only one place where that ability was used, a mysterious office code 640. Being a code ending in 0, you would expect it to go to a place like Vesey Tandem 2 since so many of the Centrex CU codes ended in 0, but 640 was not a Centrex CU code. It went to a number 5 Crossbar office in the New York 4 building, 32 Avenue of the Americas. When we would dial 640 from New York City, that would route to Vesey Tandem 2, which would then MF to this Crossbar 5. But no matter what number I dialed, I never found a working 640 number that gave a business answer. Every now and then, however, I would find a number that would just ring indefinitely. I believe I had heard from Bill that toll-free 800-221 numbers, that's one of the two 800 office codes in New York City, were converting to 640. In other words, if you were calling 800-221-2368, that would convert to 640-2368. But even if that's true, there was no particular reason for them to go out of their way to make 640 dialable from the local New York City network. And sending it through Vesey was definitely going out of their way. 640 was in the same marker group, the same switching entity, as another office code, 431, and 431 was perfectly normal. The 640 code could have been sent the same way as the 431 code, not using a Centrex tandem, just going through normal trunks. But 640 had to go through Vesey 2 for some reason. I don't know. Anyway, here is 640-9970. A permanent busy number. Our Crossbar 1 here PCIs to Vesey Tandem 2, which MFs to the Crossbar 5. Okay, so there's the permanent busy number. We know it ends in 0, so the tone right before the end is a 0. That would be this. As in, that's the 0 as in 9970. Now it's a 5-digit MF string, so it should be key pulse 09970. Let's listen to the first actual digit, the second tone. What? That's not a 0. That is a 2. This is a 0. So they are going out of their way to send 640 numbers to that Crossbar 5 as 2 plus the last 4 digits. That's called code converting, and it takes extra relays to do that. And the only reason that's done is if you have another office code ending in 0 served by that same Crossbar 5, and there would be a code conflict, so one of the codes gets converted to another digit. 640 gets converted to 2, so it won't conflict with that other code ending in 0, which is, well, actually, there isn't one. So 640 just doesn't make any sense. I truly have no idea why it was there. Here's a call to the supervision test in 640 during a time where either the trunk or the test itself is failing. So you get kind of a clicky ring. In the past 3 calls, we've heard Vesey Tandem 2 MFing and Vesey Tandem 2 has especially loud MFs, just as it has loud dial pulsing. Now, I want to take a moment and explain something that I have been putting off explaining, and I'm afraid if I don't explain it now, I'll never get to it. This is about what happened after the famous 2nd Avenue fire. When the 2nd Avenue building had a serious fire on February 27, 1975, the panel equipment was completely destroyed. That took with it Suburban Tandem. But Suburban was already in the process of being retired. City Tandem and Interzone Tandem were also irreparably damaged. As far as the routing of the local network is concerned, dealing with the loss of City and Interzone was a much bigger headache than the loss of Suburban Tandem because City and Interzone were needed for as long as there were panels in New York City. And that was going to be another 4 years. But I'm not going to discuss that here except for one little part of it. Now, fortunately, Gotham Tandem
21213
had only smoke damage. So Gotham, along with 260 and the other number 1 Crossbar end offices, was resurrected. With Gotham Tandem back in service, the Crossbar 5s in New Jersey could once again use Gotham to call the entire city. Well, almost the entire city, because Gotham Tandem still didn't have the ability to send out MF. And just as before, it needed pulse conversion tandem to reach the Centrex CU codes in the outer boroughs, as well as a few special cases like 333. Here's 333 going through Gotham before the fire. I'll mention the name of each office as we cut through to it. Gotham, pulse conversion, Midtown, and the destination Crossbar 5. Now, after the fire, there is no pulse conversion tandem because that was part of Interzone, which was destroyed. Nonetheless, they did come up with a way to get those calls through. Here's 333 going through Gotham after the fire. I'm going to play this again and mention what we're hearing here. Here's Gotham sending PCI to something, which MF'd to this, and now here's Midtown, which MF'd to 333. So it's Gotham, something, something else, and Midtown. What are those two switching machines in the middle of this call? Well, mystery switch number 1 is being used to convert Gotham's PCI to MF. And at this point in time, there are only 2 tandems in the New York City network that are even able to do this. One of them is Bushwick Tandem number 1.
21231.
Bushwick 1 can convert PCI to MF, and it has trunks to every one of the places that Gotham needs to reach, like Tremont, Queens, Staten Island, etc. And it also has 3 Centrex codes of its own, and Gotham could go right there to connect to those. So Bushwick 1 is a very good possibility. The other tandem in the network that can convert PCI to MF is Vesey Tandem 2.
2127.
But Vesey Tandem 2 does not have trunks to anything except a bunch of Centrex CUs and 640. Now, crossbar tandems like Bushwick and Vesey 2 and others that receive PCI are using a different kind of register sender, and those have a distinct sound signature that is specific to the machine. In New York City, if you listen to a crossbar tandem receiving PCI and then you hear it outpulse, you can tell which tandem it is because each one has a distinctive sound signature. Now, Bushwick, when it receives PCI and then MFs out, it sounds like this. You don't hear the outpulsing at all. Vesey Tandem 2, on the other hand, in the same situation, sounds like this. Not only do you hear the outpulsing, it is extra loud compared to all the other crossbar tandems. So if we go back to our post-fire Gotham call, you can tell that Gotham is using Vesey Tandem 2 to do the conversion. And notice, by the way, how much softer the Midtown MFs are compared to the Vesey 2 MFs. You see what I mean? So Vesey Tandem 2 became the new pulse conversion tandem solely for the use of Gotham Tandem.
21213.
But at that point, they still had a problem because Vesey Tandem 2 only had trunks to a bunch of Centrex CUs and 640. So, what to do? Well, they could have built a whole bunch of new trunk groups from Vesey 2 to Tremont, Queens, Staten Island, etc. But it didn't make sense anymore because the numbers were a lot lower. Suburban Tandem was gone, and the new pulse conversion tandem was really only being used for a relatively low number of calls coming in from New Jersey to Gotham Tandem. For that relatively low number of calls, they built an appropriate-sized trunk group to just one tandem, namely the Varick Street 4A.
21245.
This is a tandem that can only receive MF, but it has trunks to pretty much everything in New York City, and that is how they solved the problem. Vesey 2 to convert PCI to MF,
2127.
Varick 4A
21245.
for its trunks to the whole city. And by the way, Varick did have direct trunks to 333. It just wasn't a very big trunk group. Again, expensive trunk equipment. So I used an example which we saw more often than not during peak times, where it used Midtown. So why didn't they use Bushwick Tandem number 1? Why didn't that become the new pulse conversion tandem? I don't know. Maybe building a PCI trunk group, which would have to be wireline from the Lower East Side to Bushwick, Brooklyn, was something that was costly and problematic. Maybe Bushwick didn't have the capacity to take more PCI calls. In any case, Vesey Tandem 2 and Varick Street and Gotham Tandem are all kind of in Lower Manhattan. Gotham is on the Lower East Side. Those other two are in the Wall Street area. It may have just been cheaper and easier to do it that way. If you're familiar with the Hi-Fi 914 programs, which I strongly recommend, it's great audio. In those programs, there's a long segment where I'm working with Vesey Tandem 2, and you'll hear me sending a weird assortment of office codes into Vesey 2. In those programs, I didn't explain where that list of office codes comes from. Here, I have finally explained it. Those codes are on the list of codes that Vesey Tandem 2 provides pulse conversion to Gotham for. That's where the list of codes in the Hi-Fi 914 series comes from. In the next program, I'm going to put some calls through Tremont Tandems 1 and 2, which are in this building. And when you put a call through a Crossbar tandem that's in your same building, you hear an amazing high-frequency response as it is outpulsing to the other office. MFs sound different. The dial pulses calling the Bronx DID code 920 also sound uniquely interesting. I'll be covering that and the other Centrex tandems next. This program contains some calls that are composites, extremely realistic, but the PCI does not match the numbers dialed numerically. If anybody wants to study the sound of PCI, please use Group Bell Master 39, not this program.